Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we continue our series on the presidential election this week with a political historian, a pollster, and the managing editor of one of the state's leading political websites, Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, as we talk and air and chat with you folks out there, we're in the middle of July. It looks like this presidential race has been going on for what, about 10 years? It seems like that. Joining me to chat about various aspects of it are sitting across, and two guys that I know quite well. Berwood, Yost, he's the director of the Center for Opinion Research at F&M, Franklin and Marshall College, and a colleague of mine. He's a head methodologist for the Franklin and Marshall College poll. We do a lot of research together, write a lot, and sitting next to him is John McLarnon. He's our political historian. He's at Millersville University. John and I write a lot of political history together, some of which I think actually gets published, right, John?
Occasionally.
Occasionally, yeah. John, let me start with you, and then we'll get to Berwood. I mean, it seems like if we try to put these modern elections in some kind of historical context, it almost seems like nothing matters. The race seems stuck. Same president's job approval, economy is in the tank, but yet the president is running slightly ahead in national polls. I want to ask Berwood about why in a minute. But historically, this seems so odd that this race for so long seems to have no movement, no matter what happens. We have the health care ruling. We'll get into that. Nothing seems to happen. What do you think's going on here?
I don't know what's going on. Luckily, you know, since I deal with the past, I don't have to worry about trying to figure out the present.
Future.
But thinking about 1980 with Reagan and Carter,
right?
There seemed to be much more activity. There was jockeying around that you didn't have here, and I don't know whether it's just that the issues for this election have been defined for so long.
Yeah, that's a good point. Berwood shaking his head. That's a good point. Go ahead, finish your thought.
That unless something out of the ordinary happens, all you hear is discussion of the same thing over and over again. Whether the healthcare, I'm sure there's the healthcare decision will give some people something to talk about for a while. Yeah. But even with that, it's more speculation than anything else. Does it help Obama? Does it hurt Obama? I don't know.
Do you agree? I mean, it does seem like, and you look, you've polled on a lot of these things. Like, we're virtually getting the same responses, aren't we?
Right. Well, I think there's probably a couple of reasons why things are so stable. One is that the candidates are so overexposed from day one. I mean, there's so much written about them. There's really not much new information being generated that would change people's perspectives. But I think the other thing is, in a macro sense, there are two big issues. You got the economy, which most people think the president has underperformed on the economy. But the other issue is his alternative. Who are you going to put in his place if you aren't satisfied with the job he's done? And I think people are personally uncomfortable with Mitt Romney. They don't like him personally. And so I think historically one of two things is going to happen. A president's going to be reelected with historically bad economic numbers, or a challenger is going to be elected with historically bad favorability ratings.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, John, as a historian here, you know that during virtually every major economic downturn in American history, American electorate has said, well, we're going to put in a new team. Right. They did it with Reagan. Right. They did it with FDR. They did it back, through the depressions. And if you recall, we've had past elections where literally in 1992, in the midst of that recession, Clinton was behind through the spring and into early summer, and the same with Ronald Reagan was behind Carter. Do you agree with Bert? Go ahead.
The 80 election, I think, is rather remarkable. When you look at the number of issues that there were in 1980, I mean, you had the Iran hostage crisis. Right. You had Carter's perceived antagonism towards ERA. Right. You know, he was in favor of it, but he didn't support it really strongly.
And in the sense that he was maybe not so competent?
He wasn't so competent. And Reagan rejected it, although he later made a speech where he said he supported women's rights.
Yeah.
And a lot of people forget there was a strange occurrence, actually just a few days before the hostage crisis. If you recall, Jimmy Carter, who ran cross-country at Annapolis, collapsed.
I forgot about that.
He collapsed in a 10K race, and the picture was on the front page of the New York Times.
So it reinforced the view.
This weak president who couldn't deal with the Russians and couldn't deal with the Iranians and couldn't get we had interest rates, 15, 16, 17%.
They were high.
That's right.
All right,
the economy.
We're going to run to a break. When I come back, I want to explore with Berwood and John. I'll start out with Berwood. This whole health care seems to have left the country pretty much where it was before one of the biggest Supreme Court rulings in American history. All right, we'll be back with this assessment of the 2012 presidential election following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back. Well, we're doing a kind of a midsummer, is it midsummer and mid-July? I guess so. Midsummer assessment of the presidential election with Berwood, Yost, and John McLarnon. Berwood, look, you've done a lot of healthcare polls. We did those together. Obviously, the people favor universal coverage. As you know, overwhelmingly, lots of the president's program popular, paying for it and all the costs derived therefrom, not so popular. What stunned me is one of the biggest rulings in American history. And what changed?
Well,
go ahead.
Not a lot. I mean, I think you could probably point to one thing that changed, and that is Democrats may be a little more supportive than they were. So what we have now that is different than before is that we now have as many Democrats who love it as we have Republicans who hate it. And it's about 3/4 in both camps. I think that importantly, right now, I mean, we're still pretty divided about the law. The independents, though, the truly independents, they themselves are still divided equally about the law as well. So where are we? We're not in a much different position currently than we were before the decision. I think what surprised me, though, when this law was passed, historically, in terms of public opinion, those big kind of government programs that give these benefits typically become much more popular over time. That hasn't happened yet to the health care law. Now, some might say that's because some of the major provisions are yet to kick in. But,
that's true.
But I thought by now it would be more popular than it is.
Yeah, as well as the taxes in 2014. We'll
that's
see.
Right.
John, look, as a political historian, you know that there have been, these events that have really shaped American history, whether it's been the Depression, but big events like the New Deal with all the government reform programs with Lyndon Johnson. Does Barack Obama think that this is his moment in history where we can have that kind of big government, but we never had discussions like $16 trillion debt before, have we?
Well, we had discussions of debt during the New Deal.
Yeah.
Because if you recall, by the late 30s, even Roosevelt himself was concerned about balancing the budget.
That's right. That's
and managed to throw
point.
the country back into depression. I don't know during the Great Society how much Lyndon Johnson himself was concerned. Certainly the opponents of Medicare and Medicaid
talked about the cost.
They talked about, number one, this is socialism, and number two, talked about the cost.
Yeah.
But the numbers were not in either case what they are today, nowhere near. I don't know, adjusted for inflation, whether they were the same.
Yeah.
But certainly there was always the concern about, Roosevelt really was quite conservative when it came to fiscal matters. And he was.
That's a good point. That's something I don't think is emphasized. All right, Berwood, last question before I let you guys go. Is this going to remain this close? I mean, they're about 3-point lead for the president. Well, I'm going to talk to Keegan about our state, and we'll have you back on, to get into the polls and stuff. you think this is going to go down to the wire?
Well, it certainly will go down to the wire. I think the only possible, I mean, there could be external factors that make this change. I mean, we know what we know about the candidates. We know what we know about the economy. Maybe some more positive job reports would help the president. Maybe some foreign policy issue might help the president as well. But I think we are where we are. It's going to go back and forth. And the tightness of the race is reflected in the fact that the media covers all these small groups about what they're doing and what's happening with them. But in the aggregate, it's not changing much.
Yeah, John, one other point that strikes me as important is how much the economy will drive this election. It already has, and we see where there's no big gain. But you mentioned something earlier about the Iranian hostage crisis. I mean, as a historian, there could always be events that we sit here right now, we're not even thinking about that could have a huge effect on this election despite all the analysis that we're going through.
We don't know what's going to happen, what North Korea might do between now and November. We don't know how it's going to develop with our relationship with Russia, Syria, the whole Middle East, Egypt. We simply don't know. We don't know what Israel's going to do. I mean, they could do something between now and the election and the administration's reaction to it could show the administration to be have a much better handle on foreign policy.
I think that helps the president.
Obama does better. I mean, one of his strongest, he doesn't do so well in the economy, but he does do pretty well on foreign policy. But, and that's still, go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, he hasn't been able to talk much about that. He's been doing these other things, particularly reflecting on the economy. But I think if something would turn, that's the reason I thought that it would benefit him. If something turns to foreign affairs, he's got a tremendous advantage over Mitt Romney.
Nonetheless, even George Bush with an 89% favorability rating coming out of Desert Storm, the economy went south, and there went his presidency.
That's right.
We also have the situation in Europe. We have who knows what China will do with the economy. The stock market's up. Jobs numbers, we're not quite sure as we tape this program, ultimately how voters will feel about it. But the economy does seem to be sort of stuck in place. Berwood doesn't seem to have a huge advantage for either candidate.
I think that the job growth in the private sector has been much better than what we've seen in the public sector. And state and local government jobs have been lost. I've seen some assessments that if those had grown at the same rate they did in other previous downturns, we'd be at a 7% unemployment rate, not 8%.
All right,
what
go
Reagan
ahead.
said.
What?
A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours.
That's a good point to end on. All right, Keegan Gibson is here. He's been all over the state election in the state. We'll chat with him. Talking about we're not in a recession on this program. We're going to pay our bills, and we'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, we're going to now turn our attention to Pennsylvania politics and in specific the Pennsylvania presidential election. Joining me is Keegan Gibson. He's the managing editor of politicspa.com. It's a great website, by the way. I encourage you to get on and follow it. I read it every day. Keegan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the state. Let's start with the overall picture. The polls. I did a poll a month or so ago, showed Obama maybe at the high end, 12. We've got him at 8 and 6. But Romney has not led in any polls. Can Mitt Romney, in your judgment, close the gap even further?
Yeah, I think he can. There's room for him to close the gap. A lot of the problem that he's had so far is that his campaign hasn't spent any money in the state. He's done a few visits, but they haven't put Pennsylvania high on their target list. But if they prioritize the state and he spends a little more time here, I think that he could definitely close the gap.
All right, let's talk about TV advertising a minute. In 2008, Pennsylvania was the second most advertised state. If we go from after Labor Day, crunch time up to the November election, $25 million spent in the state. As it stands now, what do you see in terms of television advertising?
Sure. Yeah. I think it was the Washington Post did an analysis the other day where they found that Pennsylvania, since the Republican primary wrapped up, is still number 2 behind Florida. So we're hanging in there. But right now the battle is the Democrats are trying to take Pennsylvania from the battleground state column and put it in the safe Democratic state. So those groups are spending more money earlier to try to take Pennsylvania off the table. Romney's campaign isn't spending here, but there are a lot of Republican super PACs that are also spending a lot of money to try to keep Pennsylvania competitive.
So Romney may, if you count the super PACs, may have spent a little more by your estimate.
By my count, between the Obama campaign and his allies, it's about $4 million.
Right.
And not the Romney campaign, but his allies, it's about 4.5 since the primary.
I think you would agree with this assessment. If you go back and you look through the past, let's say 5 elections, Obama probably can't win the presidency if he loses Pennsylvania because, given the fact that we're a little more Democratic than Ohio and North Carolina and Virginia and Florida, Romney can. Bush did, after all, won the presidential election without PA
twice.
So does Romney really have to make a decision? Since, as you point out, the super PACs have been here, but Romney's not spent any money, and he's been here. He did the bus tour a couple of weeks ago. Is there any evidence from what you? I know what Romney said when he was here, and you were covering it. What did he say?
Every candidate says they said, "I'm going to win Pennsylvania." Right. That's true. Everybody says that. I think what he has to do right now is, even if he decides in a few months not to make a concerted push for the state, he's got to keep Obama and keep Democrats spending money here to play defense, because that's money that they can't use in Virginia or North Carolina or Colorado or other states.
Right. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. The other aspect of it is, let's talk a little bit about President Obama. Here recently did this sort of tour, working class, talking about jobs, bus tour. Romney did a bus tour. Obama, blue-collar, working-class voters, not so friendly to him in 2008, didn't win a vote. How important is that segment of the electorate in Pennsylvania?
Well, we actually took a look at the Democratic primary results a few weeks after the primary happened, and we found that there was a pretty wide gap in a lot of western PA white working-class counties where Democrats left the ballot blank rather than vote for the president. I think that's where you see the Democrats' Bain strategy come in, because he's always had a problem with working-class folks out in western PA. But if they can make Romney look like Richie Rich, or a guy that just doesn't get them, they can poison the well for him.
All right, I'm talking with Keegan Gibson. We're doing a quick analysis of Pennsylvania. We'll be back for more of this analysis after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business, with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back to the program, Politics PA. This is the managing editor, Keegan Gibson. Get on that website. It's a wonderful website. All right, Romney also has something of a problem. I mean, he comes across a little bit as aloof. He's been working on it, but he just, blue-collar working-class voters, will they connect with him? That's still a pretty big question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mentioned the Obama primary results. If you look at the Romney map, it's almost the exact same. He has a deficit, where Republicans out in western PA voted for some of the other candidates on the ballot rather than him in the primary. I think that when he goes out to a Bethel bakery in Pittsburgh and insults the cookies and things like that, mispronounces Wawa or something like that. That's the kind
of. We can't say Wawas, right?
It's not Wawas. No, no.
Wawas,
so
yeah.
he's working on trying to connect with those voters, but that is the battleground in my view.
Yeah. Well, that infamous picture with George Herbert Walker Bush and the scanner, from like 1992 campaign, didn't help him during the midst of that recession. And I guess all right, let's talk a little bit before I let you go about the organizational side of things. Mm-hmm. One of the most underreported stories was the degree to which the president, then Senator Obama in 2008, really put together a grassroots organizational structure with field offices. Much of it was on TV and the bigger picture. What do you see in the field now? Do the Romney folks understand how effective the president was, you think, in our state and in these battleground states, at the field organization side, get the vote out, the old proverbial knocking on doors? Republicans
understand the value of field, but in 2008, President Obama's campaign wrote the book on it. I mean, they really performed superbly. And as I said before, the Democrats are trying to win Pennsylvania early. So they have something like 25 offices open, and they have volunteers in there nearly every day making phone calls. So they've been very active in the state so far. Republicans, I would say, are in catch-up mode. They have 20 or so local offices that they're converting for use for the Republican and for the Romney campaigns, and they're catching up. Right. They still have a little bit of catching up to do, but I think at the higher levels of campaigns, you fundamentally have a difference of view, whereas Democrats see field as the bread and butter. Right. Republicans see it as sort of a way to make up another point or two in a close election. I get it. Now, one other consideration, it seems to me, is, turnout and enthusiasm. It looks like in our state, we're not seeing a big differential the way we have in wave elections. Mm-hmm. When you've gone out and, I know that you've been covering a lot of these events up, close and personal, as they say. Can you get any sense about the difference of the enthusiasm, or is it, or are we going to have to wait till after Labor Day? I think the problem that President Obama has is that it's so easy for reporters to just go back and look at pictures of 2008, where he'd go to a stadium and it would be absolutely packed. Right. Now he goes to the same stadium and it's 50% capacity. Yeah. Still better than average for a president or a politician, but it seems to give the impression of an enthusiasm gap. Whereas Romney he started out in the small room with a small crowd in Pennsylvania during the primary. Now when he goes somewhere, he can easily draw several 100,000 people. Yeah. So, but you would agree that how much emphasis they can get on this get out the vote, and it doesn't look like we're going to have the same kind of turnout. Could make a big difference. I mean, the Romney people may understand how important that is. Yeah, I think Pennsylvania is either going to be a 1 or a 2 point state this cycle, or it's going to be a 10-point state. Yeah. If Romney decides to contest and puts the money in a field program here in the state, he can make it very, very competitive, I think. All right. Well, look, thanks for coming on. We'll have you back, and we'll get a sense about this. Romney the president has a lead, but as you point out, Romney could catch. This could go either way. All right. As always, thanks for watching this edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.